Chapter 5. That's fucked, Misha said, after Titus finished telling her about his lunch with Ashkar. There had been a minute of silence as she sat on the porch with him, smoking her cigarette while he sipped from a 16-ounce can of Dr. Pepper. I'm sorry, T. Nothing for you to be sorry for, Mish. His phone buzzed and he looked at the message, grunted. Shit. Maybe giving him my number was a bad idea. Misha reached out her slender hand and, without hesitation, he forked it over. She read the text message from Ashkar and gave the phone back. What do you think? Well, it's certainly something different for you, she said. Misha stubbed out her cigarette in the ashtray that Titus's parents had picked up just for her. Nobody in their family smoked, but they knew Misha and her father did. But you've only just met the guy. Do you trust it'll just be some drinks with dear old Dad, as it were? Honestly, no. I think he wants a pretext for trying to tell me more about our people, or about Chaldea. That was most of what he talked about earlier, after all. That might be nice, actually. She lit another smoke, took a short first inhale, and blew a streak away from the burly young Minotaur. We only had, 2 other Minotaurs in our class? And none above our grade. Yeah, I never saw much need to do the whole racial history dive. He wrung his hands together, looking at them for a long moment. He thought back to how easy it had been, just a couple of hours earlier, to throw Joey Thompson, a full-grown lizard man offensive lineman, clear to the sideline from nearly the middle of the field. He'd been almost blind with undirected fury, and had barely been able to refrain from ramming his own quarterback into the dirt with as much force as he could muster. Maybe Sutek can tell me something about Minotaur tempers that I should know about. How do you mean? Titus briefly told her about practice, how he had gone through the motions in a state of unfocused fury and aggression. Huh. I wonder if that's sort of like the stuff my dad had to tell me about when I turned 13. The stuff about having elven blood? No, about having access to magic, Misha clarified. The stuff about elven features and inheritance he wasn't as sure about, since my mother's a Hume. She was able to handle the whole welcome to womanhood thing easy enough when I was 11, but Dad had a harder time explaining wild bursts to me when I woke up one day and started screaming in my bedroom because the dream I'd been having when I started coming up out of sleep was being displayed on the wall across from my bed. My eyeballs were acting like some kind of film projector. Titus tried and failed to hold back a snicker. She had never told him about her very first use of her magic, and hearing it now, it struck him as innocently hilarious. She had told him before about a few of her early wild bursts, random bursts of unguided spellcraft, that those naturally adept at magic had been dealing with since the Outworld incidents worldwide. Even a few native-born humans, since the incidents, had developed unprecedented access to magic, a phenomenon that the scientific community had tried, unsuccessfully thus far, to figure out. Wild bursts never happened for pure-blood elves, you see, so he had no idea how to explain it to me. Thankfully, my Aunt Telia had a few Hume friends back in Chaldea who'd been born with natural magical talents, so she knew what it was like for them. Huh. Say, that was something I was wondering about, too, Titus said. He took a swig of his soda, eased back on the rocking chair on the other side of the little end table from Misha's seat. Whenever Sutek mentioned magic, he had this, a disdain for it in his voice, like the whole subject made him uncomfortable. Yeah? Titus looked over at her and put his hand on the end table, palm up. What's up? Put your hand in mine, he said evenly. Misha did so, looking him in the eyes. Okay, now what? Now cast a spell. Use some magic. I want to see something. Misha nodded, and with her free hand she sketched a strange, glowing sigil in the air, which vanished in a cloud of purple smoke that streaked out in front of them toward the sidewalk, shifting with a rush of air into a facsimile of Samurai Jack and the Scotsman from the old Gendy Tartakovsky animated series, dueling on the pavement. The scene played out for a few moments, and Misha smiled as she felt the gentle pressure of Titus closing his hand over hers. "Good," he said, almost too quietly for her to hear. "What's good, bud?" she asked, still watching her impromptu little display. "Knowing that the intention and source of the magic makes a difference," Titus answered. "Magic itself isn't some terrible thing, I think. It's the person using it that counts." The pair sat like that a few minutes more, until the illusion display naturally faded, and they stood up and faced each other. Titus leaned down for a brief hug, and she patted him gingerly on the back. "You know how to get in touch if you need to talk again, big guy," she said, pulling away from him. Titus grinned down at her. "Yeah. Thanks, Mish." She headed down to her van and took off, leaving Titus Jacobson standing on his parents' porch, feeling significantly less grumpy. A man cannot choose his blood, but thank Christ the Lord he can choose his friends, he thought, heading inside for the night. "O'Connell!" Ashkar bellowed as he pressed his way through the unusually dense crowd a couple of evenings after Misha and his son's evening porch talk. He had a briefcase in his hand, a case the Minotaur was eager to get out of his own hands and into his employer's, so that he could talk to the man about a fairly lucrative idea he'd started putting together in his own head, whilst he'd been sparring with Titus. The owner and tender of the bar raised his shaggy head at the sound of his name, and he signaled for Ashkar to follow him to the back storeroom behind the bar. When they got to the back room, O'Connell threw the deadbolt and grunted at Ashkar, pointing to one of the shelves along the storeroom wall. The Minotaur put the case down and drew a small silver key from his pocket, handing it to the boss, who used it immediately to pop open the case, revealing a curious wooden implement of some sort. As soon as the case had been opened, Ashkar's suspicions about the nature of its contents was confirmed, however. Whatever the wooden item was, it was laced with some unknown and destructive magical energy. A weapon, likely a charged rod or wand of some kind, Ashkar thought, probably not registered with any authority. "Oh, it's a beauty, all right," O'Connell muttered. "Course, it had better be, given what I paid for it." He clapped the case shut once more and reached up to tuck the case out of plain sight on one of the uppermost shelves in the room, clapping his hands together. "Well, a job well done, bucko, and my thanks." The bar owner pulled a roll of $100 bills from a pocket and peeled 5 of them off, handing them over to Ashkar without a thought. As Ashkar tucked the money away into his own pocket, he raised a finger for his boss's attention. "What's on your mind, then?" "Those fantasy football pools you mentioned the other day. Were you able to talk to anyone about setting one up for the bar?" "Oh, shite that," said O'Connell, with a smile for a change, entirely genuine. "That was one of the easiest fucking things I've done since buying this place, sunshine. Come on, half of the boys out there right now are fixing to set things up for opening weekend, both college and the pros. You got a line on that Minotaur kid at Buff State, Jarkerson or whatever his name is." "Jacobson, yeah," Ashkar said. "I think that kid's going to do some damage this Saturday, and I'd love to take a few bets with these guys," he said, as they returned to the bar's main room. "Mom, this is ridiculous," Titus said, trying to maintain his composure and managing by the thinnest of margins. "You've been to every home game since I started playing in middle school. This is just," he said, pacing back and forth in the living room, the caps on his hooves thumping rhythmically as he stalked about. "It's just wrong." "I think your mother's heart is in the right place, son," John Jacobson interjected, settled in his recliner, his post-breakfast cup of coffee on the lamp table next to him, steaming lightly. "The Lord says to honor thy mother and thy father, Titus," Linda said cheerily, standing by the living room entryway, her hands clasped together under her chin, dressed in her traditional season game day attire, a Buff State generic jersey and black slacks, just like John. "And I think it would be a good chance to let Ashkar see you play the way that we've been able to see these last few years." Titus ceased pacing, planting his hands on his hips and scowling at her. "You're not going to budge on this, are you?" "Not a chance, sweetie." "And yet, I'm the one who's literally bullheaded around here," Titus grumbled, throwing his hands up in surrender. Okay, I'll call him. Do you want me to message Misha and her dad, see if they want to come over here maybe and watch the game on TV with you?" "I already called Tarian yesterday to invite them over," Linda said with a satisfied smirk. "I thought this all through already, young man, so don't try to sabotage it. Just call Ashkar." Titus went into the kitchen and thumbed through his contacts, navigating to the S section, where he had saved the older Minotaur as Sutek, father, I guess. He hit call and held the phone up. It rang only a few times before picking up. "Titus," Sutek said groggily on the other end of the line. "It's game day for you, isn't it? What's going on?" "My mom wants you to use her ticket to come to the game today, Sutek. Players' parents have their own reserved section along the rows closest to the field, between the two 45-yard lines. It's pretty good spots." "Well, hell's bells, that's a damn nice offer of her, and I gladly accept, son," Sutek said. "Don't call me that." Right, sorry. "So psyched for the first game of the season?" "Just be here in a couple of hours. You and my dad can either ride together or separately," Titus said with a sigh before hanging up and shoving the phone in his pocket with a grunt. He made his way back to the living room, bade his parents a quick see you later, and went to his truck to head to the campus. Titus made his way to Coyer Field, heading into the nearby athletics building for the Bengals' locker room. He wasn't the first player to arrive, though this was no surprise. On game days, Steve Richards, the team's first-string QB, practically arrived before sunrise. Titus loved playing football, sure, but for Richards, the game was practically his religion. Richards sat on one of the wide metal benches between rows of lockers, a tablet open on his lap, brows furrowed as he watched a video on it. Titus popped open his locker and reached in for his gear, starting to get suited up. "What are you watching, Steve?" Pennington game from last season," the Hume answered. "The advantage of having parents who record every game and upload them online." He waggled the tablet faintly. "I get to watch footage and figure out defenses. A lot of their starters today were juniors last year, so it'll mostly be the same players. I can't imagine they've improved enough or changed schemes dramatically for them to play much different this year than last." "That's actually really clever of you," Titus said. Richards just shrugged. "I thought about it near the end of last semester, something my Econ 302 professor said to us. Corporate espionage is mostly about finding out what your competitors have done that works and reviewing it over and over again until you can either do it better than them or find a way to disrupt them from doing it. I'm not the brightest bulb in the box, Titus, but I'm not stupid." "Never said you were, Steve." "I know, but there are plenty of folks around here who seem to think I am." Richards watched another minute of video before pausing again, speaking as Titus pulled his jersey over his pads. "What happened to you the other day, man?" Titus held still, waiting to see if Richards would elaborate. "You came close to just completely uncorking on me during practice the day you tossed Thompson around like a rag doll." Titus finished tugging his jersey down, adjusting the collar so that it was properly situated. "Did Steiner try to get you to take me out for opening game?" "Steiner may be jealous, but he's not that unhinged," Titus scoffed. He tilted his head to one side slightly, second-guessing that notion for a moment. "Well, actually, I suppose that depends on the subject at hand." "Yeah, no kidding." You ever hear his theory about the Outworld incident and how it was actually a CIA deep state psyop to press down on the average masses of humanity? Richards asked, affecting a slightly Alex Jones-style voice for a bit. Dude's got a few screws loose. Titus snickered, then let out a sigh. Look, I'm sorry about the other day, man. I'm just working through some family shit, that's all, he said. Richards nodded. Yeah, I get that. That's sort of the whole reason we had Steiner in for that 3-game stretch last season. How's your mother holding up these days? She's okay, but my dad just has no clue what to do with the RV now. It's just sort of sitting along the side of the house, I guess. My uncle didn't keep it in the best shape, so they can't get anyone to buy it off of them. And it'd be cheaper to scrap the damn thing as opposed to fixing it up to where it'd be worth using. They were able to sell his house easy enough, though, right? You kidding? For a Bar Harbor brownstone 2 minutes from the shore? They had that thing closed out in about a month. Hey, come here. You should take a look at this, Richardson said, pausing his video. Titus sat down on the bench next to him, and Richardson used his finger to draw a little red circle over one of the Pennington offensive linemen. See this guy here? Watch when the ball snapped. Titus squinted at the screen, watching the play as it developed. Richardson clicked through to 4 more video clips, and on the last one, Titus thought he spotted what it was the QB was trying to get him to see. He's digging his fingers up into his assigned guy's bicep at the start of each snap, the young Minotaur observed. Richardson let out a low noise. Yeah, but he doesn't clamp down or grab their arms. Is that legal? I mean, wouldn't that still technically be a holding call? No, because he's not holding his guy at all. He's just digging into the nerve for a second, Titus said with a shit-eating smile. I'll line up on him today. Richards gave him a quizzical look. Minotaurs don't have that nerve in the muscle striation on our arms on the inside. This guy's not going to know how to deal with me. It's more like a guarantee that we can be in this section, as opposed to an actual assigned seat ticket, John Jacobson explained, as he led Ashkar toward where he and Linda usually sat to watch Titus's home games. Both teams were in the process of doing final pregame warm-ups on the field, the refs and officials squaring things away to get started, and the bleachers that surrounded most of the field were less than a third occupied. Just saying, it seems almost pointless to me, Ashkar replied, tucking the parental pass ticket into his back pocket. As they sat down, Ashkar pointed toward Titus. There's our boy, John. Yep. Ashkar thought. There's that tone. Just like Titus. It had taken almost no time at all during that first time meeting the Jacobsons to get a general reading on Titus's adoptive guardians. They were both people of faith, from what Ashkar could suss out, though Linda was the far more overt in her devotion than John. Furthermore, Linda seemed more open-minded, open-hearted, and open-armed. John was decidedly not that at all. Taciturn and clipped, the middle-aged Hume plumber was not pleased at all with the return of Ashkar Sutek to his biological son's orbit, and the Minotaur thug sensed it from the word go. He had hoped that coming along with the man to Titus's home opening game of the season would help to perhaps bring the guy around a little on him. They sell beer and food at these things, right? John gave him a vaguely disgusted look. Food, yeah, but colleges don't have vendors for alcohol. NCAA rules, John said. That applies to all divisions. Ashkar pursed his lips, pulled a slim flask from his pocket, and took a quick sip on it. But yeah, that's one way around it. Concessions guys start coming around after kickoff. All right. I can buy us a couple of dogs if you're game. Yeah, that'll be fine, John said. At least humans are like us when it comes to food with their entertainment, Ashkar mused. Just makes sense that they go hand in hand. The lead official of the game blew his shrieking whistle, and the team started lining up on their respective sidelines as the team captains came to the center of the field for the coin toss. Pennington won the flip, opting to receive to start the game, and Ashkar glanced down at the sideline, spotting Titus as the young man popped on his helmet and horn caps. Buff State kicked off, and the game was officially on. Ashkar pulled his phone out, opening up a notes app on which he'd recorded the various bets that he had taken with regulars at the bar, memorizing them as best he could before tucking it away and flagging down one of the concessions workers, carrying their strapped trays of treats and drinks. The burly fellow came over, and Ashkar grabbed 4 hot dogs and several packets of condiments, 2 for himself and 2 for John, as well as a couple of the oversized styrofoam cups of cola. On the very first snap, Pennington's quarterback took a standard 3-step drop back, and Ashkar watched with a surge of excitement as Titus steamrolled the young man that he'd been assigned across from onto his back and lunged at the QB, wrapping the guy up and dropping on top of him like a totem of doom. There came from the small crowd around him a surge of cheers and applause, with someone nearby remarking, "That guy's a beast! Jesus!" A beast indeed, Ashkar thought. "What you're doing out there, boys? Keep doing it," Coach Reynolds said as the team sat huddled around in the locker room at halftime, soaking in the joy of having dominated Pennington defensively in the first half. Titus had sacked their quarterback 4 times in the first 2 quarters, dropped their half and fullbacks for loss of yards on 6 plays, and swatted 1 pass right out of the air, spiking the ball almost directly back into their QB's hands. He was having the best opening game of his collegiate career. They've been able to slip a few trick plays past us, but Connor and Dylan have kept that shit pretty short, which I know we all appreciate. Mutters of approval met this, and Coach Reynolds slipped backward, letting Coach Aldern, the team's overall head coach, step into his place. Where Reynolds was a stout man of middling years, Aldern tended to leave people with the initial visual impression that a very tall piece of beef jerky had attained sentience, put on a windbreaker and old trousers, and been given a baseball cap to rest 2 sizes too large atop its head whilst out in public. His eyes remained so closely narrowed that at no given moment did Titus, or anyone else for that matter, know exactly where the man was looking. The young Minotaur wondered if the man's birth certificate had been handwritten on the same papyrus as the declarations of the Roman Empire's senatorial body. "Reynolds certainly has the right of it, guys," Aldern began, his voice as dry and creaky as his visage. "Defensively, this is one of the finest units I've ever been credited with putting on a field. Of course, that might mean a bit more if we could put some more points on the board," he added, planting his hands on his hips. Aldern turned bodily toward the team's receiver corps, who had clustered together in the back of their ranks. "Richards over here has been tossing you boys some absolute beauties, and I can't help but wonder if you all slept on your arms last night and haven't got the feeling back in your fingers yet." A snicker came from Norton, their first-string running back, though the laugh lived only long enough for Aldern to shift his body in Norton's direction, now folding his arms over his chest. "Not sure what you think's so funny, Norton. Not when you fumbled the ball on their 15-yard line and gave them a chance to breathe easy." "Sorry, Coach," Norton muttered, hanging his head to look down between his cleats. "Look, fellas, we're up 13-0 right now, but it should be a whole lot uglier even than that for Pennington, and I think you all know it," Aldern continued. "Coach Tennant here has an idea or two how to correct the situation, though. Billy?" Aldern stepped back then, allowing the offensive coach, Billy Tennant, to slip between several of the players to a wheeled dry erase board that he'd set up for halftime adjustments. Among the team's staff, he was the only non-Hume, a lizard man native of Chaldea who, some said, had been a much-respected shaman back in his home world. The man had never responded to questions about such things that Titus knew of, but as he sat and listened to Tennant go over his offensive adjustments suggestions, He recognized a faint sort of tingling sensation on the back of his neck as the lizard man spoke. There is some kind of magic to him, Titus thought. What kind, I can't tell. He simply let the offensive coach go through his spiel, and when it was done, the players started to head back out toward the field, with Titus hanging back a moment as Tennant wiped his board clean. When there was nobody else within earshot, Titus cleared his throat to catch the lizard man coach's attention. Hey, one of my best friends is an illusionist, Titus said. Half-elf girl, born here. Tennant's features, already difficult for Titus to read thanks to his reptilian nature, gave no clue immediately what the man might be thinking. It took a moment before the young Minotaur realized that while the dry erase board eraser was finishing up its task of clearing the board, Tennant had turned to face him square on, nothing in his hands. Oh, hey, that's pretty neat. It's nothing compared to what I used to be able to do back in my homeland, young one, Tennant said evenly. Then again, there was a lot more mana floating about free and wild to access there than here on Earth. Still, he said, affecting a hint of a smile, I've made a good life for myself here, along with my wife and our children. Kalat's blessings followed us through the rift. Titus had no idea what this meant, though he could assume from context that Kalat was some sort of god or goddess over in Chaldea. He nodded without further input and jogged out of the facility to rejoin his teammates out on the field. He was looking forward to continuing to be a menace in Pennington's backfield. That was one of the most one-sided games of football I've seen in a long time, Ashkar remarked as he stood with John and Titus out in the parking lot of the athletics center. Titus felt a little worn, but the adrenaline rush of a solid game and a clear victory to open the season made up for the slight burning sensation in his back and legs. You played great out there today, son, John said. Thanks, Dad. Pretty miffed I missed that last SWAT down, but I think he finally figured out my timing. Pump fakes almost always get me to jump. It didn't help that you had 3 guys pushing you from one side, John observed. Well, I'm heading home. You get home in one piece, all right? He put one hand up on Titus's broad shoulder, and the young Minotaur nodded and grunted in acknowledgement. That's my boy. 7 sacks. God almighty. Mom's going to be proud of you. John ambled away toward his vehicle then, one of the only ones remaining in the lot, and after he drove away, Titus turned toward Ashkar. So, should I just follow you to wherever it is that you've got in mind, Sutek? Yeah, it's not too far from here, actually. Stick close. Titus clambered up into his pickup and followed a few car lengths back from Sutek as they drove away from the campus, making their way a short trip later to a rather ramshackle-looking bar close to the outskirts of the city of Buffalo proper. The lot, situated across the street from the establishment, was only half occupied, but Titus noticed that about a dozen other vehicles followed closely behind him and his biological father, as they claimed a couple of spots close to the street. As Titus got out of his vehicle, several of these other patrons pointed at him and started clapping raucously, congratulating him on his performance in the game just played. He raised a hand to wave awkwardly at them, and Ashkar took him by surprise, clapping him on the back fiercely. That's my boy, fellas, Ashkar barked proudly. Come on, first round's on O'Connell. We all know he's good for it, he went on, a sally to which most of the others gave a laugh. Titus, his mind slipping into the sort of analytical mode he adopted during his profiling and criminology classes, immediately started assessing the behaviors of these men and women who allowed Ashkar to lead them in a loose cluster across the street to the bar. Him and my mother, my birth mother, led a mercenary gang in Chaldea for years, he thought. It looks like he's got a similarly minded crew of pals here. And he never clarified exactly what it is he does for a living now. Titus had learned, during their lunch sit-down, that Ashkar and Vela had worked as hired muscle for years on Earth, for various criminal outfits up and down the American East Coast, particularly up in the Boston area. But beyond the barest mention of having taken up that sort of work after the Outworld incident, Ashkar had kept most of his history lesson back behind the time of his being torn from the world of Chaldea. Is it possible that some lessons are never really learned? Pausing just long enough to make sure he wouldn't get flattened by traffic, Titus jogged along to follow after the crowd, making his way into the main room of the bar, where chatter was lively and the air was choked with cigarette smoke that, technically speaking, shouldn't have been hanging around the inside of the establishment. Smoking had been banned in most indoor venues in the state of New York since the mid-1990s, but the owner-operator of the establishment had either not gotten that memo, or he didn't care about its contents. A long, panning look around at the clientele of the bar told Titus more than he needed to know about the kind of company his birth father was keeping these days. Which is to say, it didn't look much different, Titus imagined, than the company that he had kept as a mercenary in the realms of Chaldea. He watched as Ashkar made the rounds, chit-chatting briefly with small clusters of folks at the various tables and booths. What piqued Titus's interest were the swift, subtle exchanges of cash from most of these people to Ashkar, and in 2 instances, from his own collection of bills to the hands of some other customers. Just prior to these exchanges, Ashkar would pull out his phone, consult it, and then say something to the other customers before the exchange of money. They're keeping book on something, maybe running numbers of some sort, Titus mused. He started making his way toward the bar, putting up a lone finger to the gruff, seasoned-looking fellow pouring the drinks. The barkeep, pale of complexion and with the markings of a man who had seen more than a few bouts of fisticuffs, made his way over on his side of the bar, his expression softening as he came, looking almost genuinely friendly by the time he stood directly across from Titus. Oh, my goodness, other than nearly about a foot in height and half of one from shoulder to shoulder, you and he look pretty spitting image, don't you? The man said in a heavy Boston Irish accent. I beg pardon? You and Ashkar, you're kidding somehow, ain't you? He's been keeping an eye on you for a little bit now, young Jacobson. The barkeep poured a draft beer for one of his taps and slid it across to the young Minotaur. Kent over there, said the barkeep, pointing to one of the roughneck men who had followed Titus and Ashkar to the bar from the campus. He streamed the game from his phone here for some of us to watch. I tethered my own phone to the TV up there, he said, pointing to the silent television over in one corner behind the bar proper, which appeared to be playing some old sitcom rerun at the moment. You were quite effective there, young man. Titus smiled despite his natural suspicion of the barkeep and the folks around him, taken for a moment with pride in his performance in the year's first game. Well, thank you for saying so, he managed before taking a long pull of his drink. It felt good to get out there again. Ashkar came his way then, signaling for a mug of his own. So are you a regular here then, Sutek? Something like that, Titus. I work for O'Connell, he said, pointing to the barkeep. Sometimes here at the bar, sometimes handyman jobs at the apartment buildings he owns around the city. Depends on what he needs day to day. Aye, lad, your old man here's a jack of all asses indeed, O'Connell said, having overheard the 2 Minotaurs. He handed Ashkar a frothing glass, which the older Minotaur raised slightly to Titus. To one hell of a game, Titus. Cheers. Ashkar downed his entire first glass in one long pull, setting it down and swooping around his son toward the restrooms. Titus heard a few others raise glasses toward him, and he joined them in a second round of drinks. The atmosphere was generally convivial, which he appreciated despite the gloomy, dank look and feel of both establishment and patrons. Still, it felt good to be around people now and then who weren't discussing academics or their classes, or any of the navel-gazy kind of things that college folk around his age tended to indulge in. When Ashkar returned from the restroom, he pointed to Titus's glass. Still on your first, or is that 2 for you now? Titus lifted 2 fingers. Ah, gotcha. Well, you should throw the brakes on right there then, and get headed home soon, so as Linda and John don't threaten to hog-tie me to the back of that work van of his and drag me down the street off the bumper. Before you do, though, I was thinking there was something I'd invite you to partake of with me tomorrow, if you're so inclined. And what's that, Sutek? Another sparring match? I'm not sure that'd be wise. I usually like to recover on Sundays and just watch the pros and study. No, nothing like that at all, Ashkar said, waving one hand lazily about to dismiss such an idea. No, this is something more of a spiritual kind of cultural practice among our people. Give you a sense of connecting to your roots. Titus thought about the blind anger and aggression that he'd felt after their lunch together, the disappointment that Ashkar hadn't given him a chance to ask any real-pointed questions. That feeling threatened to bubble up again, but he squashed it down with a sharp mental effort. Maybe this would be good for him, help him get closer to understanding why this sudden and previously unexpected contact with his birth father seemed to have thrown him emotionally and intellectually off balance. He found himself quietly agreeing to the invitation, asking what time to expect Ashkar to show up at his parents' house. I'll be there just as the sun's coming up, so set an alarm for yourself, kid. Titus gave a thumbs-up gesture and bade the bar's crowd farewell. They returned wishes of another great game the next week and returned to their own conversations in short order. As Titus climbed into his truck, it didn't escape his notice that a City of Buffalo Police Department cruiser was slow-rolling past the bar. They already know it, too. Something is not what it seems here.